No matter how long you talk, no one's ever going to remember more than the 3 to 5 minute version of it anyway. What audiences struggle with is not the details. It's the forest because the speaker forgets to tell us what forest they're in. Because they've been in the forest for so long, they don't even know what forest they're in anymore. They forget what it is. And this is about figuring out what was actually communicated. Because too often, what was communicated was not what we thought.
If you're willing to share a general method, a lot of people right now who are nervous, who want to go into maybe even a deep, enriching conversation, that's difficult.
There are two different methods. One is a linear one that I would encourage somebody to work through, and the other is
Hello, Dr. Churchill. Thank you so much for being here today with Chung Hung Institute podcast.
my pleasure. Thank you
Um,
for having me.
Thank you. I am super excited to be here with you. And as I mentioned before we began recording, I just finished a presentation 2 minutes before our meeting. So it's a very, very ironic time. If you don't mind, I would love to just jump right in because your work is so engaging. And these days, we just see so much struggle in academia and so much struggle in real life, right? Outside of academia, people are not able to communicate well, right? AI has kind of taken over the sphere of communication. And I just wonder if maybe we can begin with hearing your story. You're teaching people to communicate beyond these barriers that are now.
My story, interestingly enough, started with a failed communication experience. I had for the first half of my career, I had actually been in an externally facing communication space in schools, but externally facing in schools, working with people, talking about the school in admissions and recruitment and alumni development and a lot of that kind of external facing role. And I was pretty good at it. I had had a lot of success. I did my PhD. I did my PhD actually in curriculum development because I was interested in the school management space and looking at curriculum differently than people had. It's something I've always been interested in. And then I taught as part of my PhD, I taught a research methodology class to graduate students. And it wasn't my first teaching experience, but it was my first experience with grad students. And teaching grad students when you're a grad student yourself is a little different, right? And it didn't go well at all. It was terrible. In fact, someone said at the end of it, Andrew Churchill should never be allowed to teach at McGill again. That was one of the um, student evaluations, and I thought I wouldn't be allowed to, but luckily the dean at the time said, Andrew, no one's ever good at this to begin with. So it doesn't matter how good you are your first class. What I care about is how much better you are your second class. And the good news for you is the bar's pretty low and you shouldn't have a hard time getting better. And you should get better and better and better and better. And we'll relook at this. We're going to meet again. If you don't get better, that's when there'll be a bad outcome. But as long as you get better, there'll be a happy ending to this story. And in fact, there was 5 years later, I won an outstanding teaching award at McGill. It's actually right there on the wall. I keep it as a reminder both of what's possible and where I've been because I know where it came from. And for me, that was the beginning of a journey of like, why didn't that work? And what I figured out over time is we think about communication, we think about presentation as a monolith, right? And it's not. It's like music. They're different genres. Music is classical music's different than rock and roll's different than hip hop. And if you confuse the two, you'll fail. And so often what we see in the presentation space is people making genre mistakes. And once I understood that, I started down that rabbit hole. I started figuring it out. And it was something I had always enjoyed doing. And then it kind of got taken away from me, or the threat of it. I was like, wait a minute. And then I started down unpacking it. And that was over 15 years ago. And I've been fascinated by it ever since. And I went from there to teaching a writing class, to teaching a presentation class, to doing presentation workshops, to then starting a coaching business and working with academics all over the world to help them present better.
I love how you basically say not to compare yourself to anyone except the you who you were before. That's what it sounds like you had to do, right?
And I think that's a great there are a couple of great pieces of this puzzle. One is to the you were before. Absolutely. Another is to realize that like people think great communicators are like, oh, you're really good at presenting. Guess what? That person worked at presenting.
Mhm.
Like I remember I was doing early on in my 3MT coaching, which is a 3-minute thesis competition for masters and PhD students worldwide, actually. And early on, I had this one student who was fantastic, stepped on stage and just owned the stage.
Mhm.
It's like, what'd you do before? Oh, I was a childhood musician, a childhood magician, and hundreds and hundreds of hours of experience on stage. And that's what we see over and over again. People who are good at it have worked at it. They've worked at their craft because presenting is a skill. You wouldn't think, oh, you're a natural writer. No, people work at the craft. Same with presenting. People work at the craft. The other thing that you said that earlier when you were talking about presenting, that made me think about it and think of this comparing to yourself. Too often, what happens when we compare to ourselves, we
Uh-huh.
we we let me get to the right part of the board here. It's always hard going backwards. Here we go. We do this, right? And we think we're going in circles. We think
Yeah.
we're not making progress. But in fact, what's happening is we're doing that.
Mm.
And it's so important to remember where we were and that with a little bit of distance, we can see that progress, right?
Yeah. Love that.
You know this, of course.
I'm learning a lot. I love this. I love the circle going up like that because I think today in society, we have we're running around in circles and people want a linear formula to get from A to Z. And we know that it's not linear, but what you're showing, the visualization, a circle going up the spiral, right? The spiral meets itself, but yet it never does.
It never does. I always say we're getting better or we're getting worse. We're never staying the same.
Andrew, you mentioned, sorry, Dr. Churchill, you mentioned writing. How about writing and communication, right? Because we have, with writing and speaking, both are forms of communication. I would go as far as to say both require mindfulness and awareness. Can you
I would
talk
agree.
about that?
I think one of the challenges right now with AI is actually is it taking away our mindfulness and awareness as we give away the writing process, as we give away the content production process. A friend of mine who talks about listening a lot was talking about this the other day and how writing takes time. Crafting a presentation takes time. And AI just it'll do it for us. And in the struggle we learn. Without the struggle, we get something that sounds like the AI is very good at giving us something that sounds good. And like, oh, I like that. And we do like it. It's pleasing, but it's not necessarily what we think. It's what someone else thinks we might think. And that's a real struggle. I love that idea of mindfulness and being in the moment and struggling in the moment. Um, Sometimes we call it the messy middle when you're not sure where it's going, and then suddenly you have that kind of eureka moment, or you have that moment that the ideas coalesce and something greater than the sum of the parts is born. And I think that's one of the things that worries me about the AI space is as we not so much for experts. Experts using AI doesn't concern me as much because they already have the expertise. They've already been through that messy middle. But with PhDs, with master's students, with postdocs who are building the literal neural connective tissue of their ideas, that their brains won't, if they don't do the work, their brains won't become wired in the way that they'll actually become experts, because we know that expertise, that happens.
It seems like with that, authenticity is, I mean, it's being lost all over. And
Potentially.
so, how can one begin to re-engage in life in a way that's not stuck in this dopamine addiction of instant noodles, right? I can't figure out what my thesis statement is, so I'm going to put all my ideas in AI and let it figure it out.
Let it figure it out for me.
Yeah, because people are forgetting how to think.
I think as human beings, I'm not sure we can forget how to think. I think I'm kind of an eternal optimist. But I do think we're wired to think. I don't think I don't, I'm not sure we can turn that off. I don't think I don't hear enough conversation talking about how AI can assist our thinking versus doing some of the work for us.
That
And
would
it's a maybe subtle difference, but it seems to me there's a relationship there that we need to keep intact. I saw it referred to the other day, instead of AI, as IA, guy named Jeremy Connell Waite, who's works in the storytelling space. It's not an artificial intelligence, it's an intelligent assistant.
Mhm.
And for that, it can potentially, like, it's very helpful. I'm not sure I answered the question.
Dr. Churchill, when you work on your presentation, when you work on public speeches, what's the method for you? If you're willing to share a general method, a lot of people right now who are nervous, who want to go into maybe even a deep, enriching conversation, that's difficult.
There are two different methods. One is a linear one that I would encourage somebody to work through. And the other is when I work with someone, I don't use. Because when I work with someone, it's literally like the messy middle. I
Mm.
start with, okay, what do you like? I start with what they're trying to do, but then often they come with a talk and I just listen and find the things that will move the dial for them, which is different for each person.
Mm.
But if I'm talking with someone about the process, for instance, in the class I teach, the process that I coach people through is to start with their audience and their purpose.
Mm.
Like, don't start with content. Start with audience and purpose, and start with thinking about, what are you trying to do? What do you hope to accomplish? What what's the benefit for the audience in listening to you? So it becomes a very audience-centric perspective. And once you've done some of that work, then the content work becomes a lot easier. The content work, essentially, we never have as much, we never have enough time, right? We
Mhm.
always have 5x, 10x, 30x as much content as we have time. So it's always a time problem. Even when we're given an hour or 2 hours or 3 hours, we could talk for 10. So then the question becomes, how do you delete content? How do you figure out which content to keep? And if you know who you're talking to and what they're interested in and what they would benefit from, it's like a giant fill. Like, it gets really small really quickly. And then you have time. So the first thing to do is figure out, um, who you're talking to, what they're interested in, what you're hoping to accomplish, what you're hoping they might do after you stop speaking. And those become kind of that becomes the a very tangible goal.
Mm.
And then you think about the content and you rethink about the content through that lens. And then you have some things that you hope they remember, and you have some things that you hope they understand, which is different than memory. And then you think about a third leg of the stool, which is, how do you want them to feel?
Mm.
Um, sometimes you want to inspire them, sometimes you want to, like, all kinds of different things, right? And once you've done that, you can start to put together a talk. And then once you've put together a talk, you can start to put together the slides that will help your audience understand what you're saying and remember what you're saying and feel what you're hoping they might feel.
Mm.
And the slides then are really in service to the talk. Too often, everyone gets that order backwards.
Mhm.
They build their slides. They don't think about, like, they take their journal article or their topic and then they build the slides. Then they go, oh my God, I'm never going to get through this in 20 minutes. I'm going to have to speak really quickly. And what can I cut? And then they say they have 10 minutes, they take 30 minutes and they cut it to 20, and then they take 20 and cut it to 15 and then talk quickly. Nothing good happens. So if you start the other way, I always say, no matter how long your talk is, build a 5-minute talk first. You're going to talk for 20 minutes, have a 5-minute version. If you're going to talk for an hour, have a 5-minute version. Um, because that 5-minute version becomes your North Star, and no matter how long you talk, no one's ever going to remember more than the 3 to 5 minute version of it anyway.
I know for myself when I'm told this talk now, maybe it was planned for 20, 30 minutes, and then it actually happens, and I'm told, oh, you only have 10 minutes, Chandra. And when I talk slower, I can always get more content in than if I rush through. And somehow 10 minutes expands to hours of content.
It's interesting, that feeling, huh? Tell me more about that.
Yeah, I feel it's just breathing. It's just knowing exactly in that moment what to say rather than, for me, it's just rather than the anxiety of how am I going to get through all this information, all this data? Because at that point, the data doesn't matter. But it feels like what you share about creating a compelling story. what's the story behind it that's going to create the most positive influence? And somehow I say more than I ever could imagine, calmly, slowly. I don't know if that's your experience. That just happened right before our meeting for me as well.
That's beautiful. I wish that for everyone listening to have that experience at least once. It's magical when time slows down, when you're comfortable, when you can breathe, when you can be in the moment. That that's the third and final leg of the journey, I think. So we have this, getting clear about audience and purpose, getting clear about content, not having too much, building slides that will support what you say and help your message versus slides that are your speaking notes, which is what too often happens. And then becoming comfortable with it, knowing that I've done a good job preparing. I have a message that's worth sharing. I don't have more than I have time because I've done that work already. And then I can just enjoy the moment and I don't need to rush. I don't need to worry and I can just be. And we sense that from people. When people are great speakers are comfortable speaking with us. And it's not an easy place to get to. And it does need to start with this understanding of audience and purpose and finding something that you're confident will be valuable for the people who are listening. And then everything changes.
A lot of people, how do you say, like they write their speaking notes. That's the slideshow. And I feel like that should be labeled a fallacy in its own right. Uh, so, how do you recommend the perfect, if using a slide deck, what's the perfect slide deck, right? Like, how would it be a word or two? I know for myself, I just use one word, a compelling image in the background, or even one sentence maximum, never
Yep.
anything more.
I think those are good general guidelines. Like most general guidelines, there's always room for them to be broken. So there are times when an entire sentence can be shared. There are times when a complicated figure can be shared, but we need to take the time with the audience so that they can process it. The one of the rules I have is if you're going to show us something, you need to figure out, you need to test it and see how long it takes for someone to process it. And then you need to give your audience that much time and more. And if you can't, then you shouldn't show it.
Yes,
So I think too often we show people, you know, tables or graphs or diagrams. So if we only had a little more time, I could explain this to you, and then we go off to the next thing. Or we explain it so fast no one can understand, and then we move on to the next thing. And we really need time for people to process the visuals. One of the nice things about one word or one image is those don't take time. So then you can, one of the reasons that usually works really well is because you've eliminated that problem, but you've eliminated it with a sledgehammer. You've
want
eliminated it by disallowing it. And then when you run into a situation where you would actually benefit from having something more complicated, you've handicapped yourself by not allowing yourself to use it.
Mm.
So I think that um, I would encourage you to experiment sometime when you have something that's a little more complicated that you think would be valuable to share it, but with the time needed for it to be shared. Because it's not, slides don't have to be simple. They just they need the time that they need. If they're not simple, they need time. And that's the place that I think people struggle. There are two exercises I do with um, people to help detach them from their slide deck, because really what happens is people become too dependent on their own slides
Yeah.
for the story. One is to use if you're working in PowerPoint, there's something called slide sorter, and you can see all the slides, but they're little tiny images.
Mhm.
So when someone has a 20-minute presentation and I'm coaching them on it, I say, okay, bring up your slide sorter. They bring it up on their laptop or screen maybe. And there's all 24 slides. There's going to be like 6 to a row and 4 rows. They're now little tiny things like this. You can't
Mhm.
read them, but you can see them all.
Yeah.
So, okay, now you have 5 minutes. Give me your presentation. What do you mean? I said, well, they're all your slides. Yeah, but I can't read them. Well, yeah, I know. I don't want you to. Just there's your outline. Go through your presentation, but it's 20 minutes. I know, but you can't read them anyway. So just do the 5-minute version. And it works really well.
Mm.
You'd be really surprised how much you learn. I often don't have to say anything after they've done it. They're just like, oh, that's how all the pieces fit together. Because 20 minutes when you're in each tree, you forget what the forest looks like. When you're only looking at the forest and you only have 5 minutes, you reconnect to the forest. And the presentation is more about the forest than the trees. What people get wrong in presentations, what audiences um, struggle with is not the details. It's the forest because the speaker forgets to tell us what forest they're in. Because they've been in the forest for so long, they don't even know what forest they're in anymore. They forget what it is. They don't know whether it's oak or maple trees because they're sitting there working down at ground level and the bark kind of looks the same of both and they're both covered and they disappear in the fall and they come back in the spring and they forget, but we need to know.
I love that. I love how you first mentioned not to jump to extremes. The slide not being crazy. Here's a graph. Let me show you everything too much and speed up when I speak for no reason. And not the extreme of here's too little. So you have no substance. And then how you go into the methodology, the forest, not being fixated on a tree. I look outside, I have a big tree in front of my window. And I'm like, oh, yeah, easy to just think that's it. Right. And you mentioned another methodology because you said two, but you mentioned one. Are you willing to share with us the other one?
The other one is to do your presentation with no slides.
Sure.
I do this with people who get dependent on their slides. I simply say, close your laptop. Say, now do your presentation. Or they have speaking notes. You just walk up and I say, can I have those for a moment? I want to look at them. And I take them. Okay, now do it again. Oh, I can't do it without my notes. I said, yes, you can. You can do it without your notes. You can do it without your slides. And as soon as you start doing it without your slides, you change your relationship with your slides. And now your slides, the problem is if you need your slides, you can't build slides for your audience because you've built slides for you.
Mm.
So you have to be able to do it without your slides so that you can then build slides that are for your audience. It's a level of mastery that most people don't realize how long it takes to put together a good presentation. They're perfectly willing to put 100 hours or 150 hours into a journal article. And then they put 5 hours into a presentation and think it's going to be okay. And it's not.
Yeah.
Um, if you go put 25 hours into a presentation, you're getting somewhere. And obviously every presentation doesn't need to be done to that level, but until you've done some to that level, um, I've never thought about this before, but try this on. Let's go down this rabbit hole, see if this works. If you're writing your first journal article, 100 hours, 150 hours, it's going to take a long time.
Yeah.
If you're writing your 10th or 20th journal article, that 100 or 150 hours maybe turns into 30 or 40. When you're doing your first presentations, I think too often people they don't, if can someone do a presentation who's done a lot of presentations and gotten really good at doing presentations without an extensive amount of prep? Yes, I can do a presentation without as much prep as a lot of other people. Won't be as good as if I spend longer. But too often, I think people don't. I see this in class. Students work on a presentation for an entire semester. One 5-minute presentation. They're basically working on the whole thing for a semester. So they'll have 50 hours of work into that 5 minutes or 40 hours of work into that 5 minutes, and it ends up being really good.
Mm.
And I think people don't realize part of the reason they're nervous, part of the reason that they are nervous is because they haven't actually done the work that was needed to this roadmap that I laid out, right? Have you gone through that process and have you gotten to the point that you're actually confident that you have something that's worth sharing and people will be able to understand it and people will follow you and people will listen?
Yeah.
Or in the back of your head, are you wondering, am I making any sense? Is this of value? Will people care? Because if you're thinking, will people care? That's the energy you're giving your audience. It's uncertainty. And audiences will feel that. Whereas when we go to the front in the room with certainty that we're sharing something of value for you, then people will pay attention because they feel that. They're like, oh my gosh, there's something important going on here. And it's not, sometimes there's this advice of fake it till you make it. And that's a tough thing to fake. And you'll never make it if it's not true. So you really do have to go through the work of having something of value to share. One of the other exercises I do is have people speak, have people do their 5-minute talks.
Mm.
And then instead of the audience giving them feedback, I'll have a practice audience where we're working in small groups and giving each other feedback. Instead of people giving suggestions and, oh, I thought you should do this, or oh, I like that, but I didn't like this, or we get in this fix it space, right?
Yeah.
But nobody knows what anyone actually heard. Nobody knows what happened. And they're already trying to fix it.
Yeah.
And what I do is say, okay, there's a 5-minute rule. The speaker's not allowed to talk for 5 minutes. And the audience just talks about what they heard.
Mm.
It's as if in the extreme case of this, what I do is I kick two people out of the room. They're not allowed to listen. You bring the two people back in the room, and then everyone who did hear has to tell the two people who weren't there what the person said. And this is about figuring out what was actually communicated. Because too often what was communicated was not what we thought. But once we're confident and we know that in the back of our head, we're like, oh, I don't know if people will understand, or I don't know if people will get it, or I don't know if people will care. Once you go through 2 or 3 iterations of this process, you get to the point that you know the audience understands and you know the audience cares because you've heard them talk about it amongst themselves. And you can hear them understand because they're able to retell the story you told. And you can hear them care because you hear it in their voice. And you can't fake that. And you hear their questions and you hear them engaging with your work. And you're like, oh my gosh, I shared something and they cared about it and they were interested in it. And they have genuine questions. And now when I go to the front of the room, I can go with confidence because I've tested it. But again, this takes time. This is a process.
But what you just said, that's the secret, confidence. And I love how you said, you said like with fake it till you make it. I also don't really believe in fake it till you make it, because why not just be authentic from the beginning? Develop yourself. Do the work.
Do the work.
Yeah.
And the problem is, so the other side of this coin is there are lots and lots of people who have done the work, but they haven't developed the confidence. And one of the things that this exercise gives them is very tangible evidence. We're researchers, for God's sakes. Research your own talk.
Uh-huh.
What is it that people hear when you speak? And for the people who work really hard on their talk but still aren't confident, what this exercise gives to them is that confidence, because now they know when they speak, people understand and people are interested because they've heard people talk about their work in a way that was accurate, in a way that demonstrated they understood. It wasn't, do you understand? Because if I ask you if you understand and you thought it was good and you say yes, and I have a little bit of imposter syndrome and insecurity, I immediately just say, oh, you're being nice to me. So your kudos doesn't help my confidence. But if you were to tell someone else, and someone else sitting here, and I told you something, and then you told someone else, you talked to them about what I had said, and I was able to listen. That's real evidence
Yeah.
because you either got it right or you didn't. And you either thought it was interesting and I could hear it in your voice, or you were just going through an exercise and you got it right, but you didn't really care. And once the person who the person who's doing the work, and there are lots of people doing the work, once the person doing the work gets that feedback, they start to develop the confidence that they need.
Andrew, Dr. Churchill, I think what you just did was you took us out of the box, right? You did. You just took us completely out of the box, because the box is, here's what I researched, here's all the work I've done, and I'm going to just, for lack of better words, word vomit it out to you, right? But it's, here's the research, here's the work what I did that I did, and here's further research of how does this actually show up, not just in the world, but in my speech, in my body, my mannerisms, even, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. One of the things I talk with people about is how do you there's a concept called immersion. Actually, it comes from the virtual reality space, but it also comes from Csikszentmihalyi talking about flow, right? I think about it as immersion, not flow, but very similar. The concept of flow or immersion where you're fully in the moment. One of the things that we want to do is we want to get our audience in the moment. One of the things we need to do is be in the moment.
Mm.
One of the reasons one of the things I talk with people about is the importance of gestures, not because they're engaging for the audience, which is what TED talks about, right? Like TED talks. Oh, you need 127 gestures per minute. Remember that. Jazz hands. But I talk about trying to, to the extent that your gestures help you be in the moment because they're natural, right? Like we had someone here, right? And like I can see them and I can see you talking to them and you can see them. There's no one here. If you're listening to this as a podcast, there's no one here. Right? It's just my hand. But there is. And when we listen or when we see or when we do that, we start to, it's not acting out what we're saying. It's allowing ourselves to be fully immersed in the moment. And it's inviting people to join us. A lot of the voice and body language work I do with people is not about, it's not directive. Not like, oh, your voice needs to be higher at this moment, or you need to speed up here because you're excited. It's like, no, you need to get excited. If you get excited about something, you're naturally going to speed up a little bit because it's exciting, because it's cool. And that's how our voice works. Our voice comes from us. And you see now there's a little more tension, right? Because I'm excited about something and I can't help myself.
Mhm.
And it's like, that's all real. I think too often we overcomplicate it by trying to manipulate it and direct it, and really what we need is people to just be real and be present.
I love that. Dr. Churchill, where can people learn from you? Where can they really learn these qualities? I mean, you just gave us so many rich jewels. I
Oh, I thank you. That's kind of you to say that. I love, as you can see, I love talking about it. I just think it's so important for people to be able to communicate their work. I I think about the time we're in, like I'm in North America, not in the US, but just north of the US, and an American citizen. And I see what's happening with the cutting of funding. And to some extent, it's academia's fault because we've sat in the ivory tower and we've removed ourselves. And in doing so, we've allowed people to then think it's okay to cut the funding
Mhm.
because they're not connected. The fact that the funding is being allowed to be cut is reflective of people not appreciating what the funding allows to happen. And that's on academia. Academia hasn't done the job, and researchers haven't done the job that needs to be done to communicate not with each other, but with the rest of the world. So the rest of the world realizes the importance of the work being done in research labs all over the world,
Yeah.
which is not your was not your question. Your question was where to find me.
But
So
that's
if you're
important
in
for
a
other folks.
research lab where you can find me, um, where kind of the first point of contact with me for most people is LinkedIn. And then the second point of contact with me is my website, which is presentbetter.org. So LinkedIn, then presentbetter.org. I have a newsletter that I is bi-monthly that I is free. and I share. So all that stuff is free. And then I do, you know, hire out programming. And I work with universities. I work with research labs. I do some work with individual professors and like individual coaches of keynote talks and stuff. But most of the work that I do is with universities and individual faculties and individual institutes and individual labs where somebody decides that it's worth the investment in their PhDs and their postdocs and potentially their professors. You know, the Faculty of Medicine hires me at McGill to work with professors when they're doing startup talks, when they're outside of their usual milieu. They're outside their genre, right? And they need some help because what they're being asked to do is different than what they normally do. So a lot of times I don't get hired by the person who's doing who I'm actually serving, but I get hired by some sort of institutional entity that thinks it's worth investing the professional development in their people to help them communicate more effectively.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being here, Dr. Churchill, with us. We've
You're
learned,
welcome. My pleasure.
at least I did, learn so much. And I hope we can also get some universities to contact you after this.
Super. Thank you.
Thank you.